all the feathers of the eagle. That comes from our great. It is each and every feather that makes the African eagle, all the different feathers, big and small, different shapes and sizes. Because the eagle is creating feathers all the time. You in this room, in your different ways, who will ensure that science, technology, and innovation take off sustainably in critical time for Africa and the wider world. A world which needs Africa, not just for its natural riches, that needs Africa not just for that or its vast and abundantly fertile land mass, but also for its peoples. 1 billion now, set to rise to 2 billion by 2050, and above all, and they are represented here in this room tonight, above all for its youth, because Africa has the world's youngest population, with two-thirds of that population under the age of 25. A continent, Africa, that also itself needs the wider world, and the world's markets, and the world's capital. But this time round, for partnerships which do not replicate the old discredited models of exploitation which so scarred Africa's relationship with the world in the past and which linger still today, but partnerships rather which are based on new models of respect, mutuality, partnerships in short for progress, partnerships for progress. And the role of legislators and of policymakers is to broker and nurture just such partnerships. Beginning at home, I would suggest, with partnerships that bridge both the public and the private sectors. Partnerships that link both political and traditional leadership. Strong civil society institutions linked in turn with an enabling and empowering state and a parliament reaching out to all the people. And significantly, given the theme of today and the next few days, partnerships that span the generations, reaching out to the youth with a promise that a renewed focus on skills, education and capacity building, with an emphasis on innovation and science and technology, will unlock Africa's potential at this critical time, so that, as we are told in the Gospels, old men may dream dreams and young men see visions, and young men see visions. But first, let's have a reality check. The good news is that Africa is emerging faster and in a better shape than many believe possible from the global recession. And there are those on this platform who have played their part in ensuring that that is so. Also, and importantly, the HIPIC and G8-inspired debt write-offs have seen a wholesale decline in crippling debt servicing. There has been a dramatic improvement in macroeconomic management, and I congratulate the Under-Secretary General and his team for their contribution to that, and a general improvement in budgetary discipline. The IMF forecasts average growth of 5.5% for the continent in 2011. Ghana, Nigeria, Angola, Kenya, Zambia, in the next decade. And Ghana, its peoples, its parliament, its governments, past and present, deserve their share of credit for bringing this country to that place. Too, and in conflict resolution, are largely positive, with an enhanced durability and capacity of institutions to resist both external and internal shocks, and fears at the onset of the crisis in global capital markets that this would somehow trigger a collapse in investment flows on and in the continent didn't materialize. By the rise of engagement between this continent of Africa, the Middle East and Asia, a sign of a new global alignment. And although private capital flows have fallen markedly, there's now beginning to see a recovery of those flows in ways that are in turn encouraging. And this has led to a new sense of what we might call Afro-optimism. We heard a lot about Afro-pessimism in the past. That was a challenge. Now we are having to deal with the challenge of Afro-optimism, fueled by the promise to those who make foreign direct investments into the continent of high returns and better still to come, fueled also this Afro-optimism by the continuing strength of the world's demand for Africa's commodity exports. But the challenge of Afro-optimism is to ensure that we never lose sight of the importance, the significance of sustainability. Sustainability and maintaining an enduring progression towards the attainment of the Millennium Development Goals, which remain for all too many people on this continent a still remote possibility in terms of their attainment, with all the human cost and suffering that results from that. Hence the importance of this agenda that we are addressing today and in the coming days. We are exploring in the course of these days an agenda that is crucial to the future of the continent. For, as President Kagame of Rwanda has said, we in Africa must either begin to build our scientific and technological training capabilities or remain an impoverished appendage of the global economy. The stark truth is that Africa lags behind both the post-industrial North and the rapidly emerging science and technology-fueled economies of the East and the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, lags behind in science and innovation and is in danger of falling still further behind. Recent statistics show that levels of technological readiness and innovation capacities in African countries are low compared to the rest of the world. So Africa is not, in fact, in a state of technological readiness to seize the opportunities represented by the rapid pace of globalization and scientific and technological development. Investment in research and development in Africa tends to be short-term, with little investment in building or improving the research and development infrastructure, leading to low-quality institutions. And we've all seen the deterioration of some of our own institutions, some of the very institutions which some of us were educated in Africa, and are proud to be educated in. When we look at them today, we look at them with overcrowded student accommodation, when we look at them with deteriorating laboratories and lecture halls, these were not the institutions which we knew and took pride in the past. So, there is a lack of dedicated institutions with an emphasis on publicly funded research, development and innovation, and national government's capacity for science, technology, and innovation policy making are weak. Too few African countries have a budget line for science, technology, and innovation. And also, too few have a national strategy with key deliverables for spending outlined in it. Industry-university collaborations are few and far between. Skill shortages are the norm in both science and in engineering, and there's too little incentive for those with skills to either remain or to return, not least in the absence of investment in higher education by central government. A mismatch of science, technology policies and development goals, and the failure to effectively promote coordinated regional approaches to science, technology, and innovation. I am the grandchild of a West African cocoa farmer. Hands up, how many of you here have a relative in the cocoa industry? Hands up. Our forefathers and foremothers. My grandmother owned a farm that was appropriated by the then colonial authorities without compensation. We haven't received compensation to this day. I'm not making a bid now, but we were never compensated as a family for that cocoa farm that the colonial administrators took. But what did they take it for? They took it to establish what became known as the West African Cocoa Research Institute in Tafo. It remains to this day, but it is no longer a West African Cocoa Research Institute. It was, at that time, a world-class center of scientific excellence, servicing the whole of the West African region. That cannot be said of the Cocoa Research Institute today, despite the best endeavors of those who were. And that is a sadly ironic fact. It is sadly ironic that we need to look to the past to get a sense of what the future might hold. But you know, we can sometimes do so with profit. You know, the great classicist Pliny had a maxim way back in classical Roman times. He said, there is always something new out of Africa. There is always something new out of Africa. And that classical maxim that I want you young people to look up. When you go back to school, look it up in your books, look it up, more likely on the internet. That classical maxim of Pliny, there is always something new out of Africa, has a basis in fact. Science, technology, Africa, characterized by the hand axe in 1.53 million BC. Only then did that tool industry spread to the Middle East and Europe in around 800,000 and 500,000 BC. West Africa in 1200 BC was the birthplace of the Iron Age. The birthplace of the Iron Age. They were making iron in West Africa when in Britain they knew only mud and dirt. They were making iron in West Africa when in Britain they knew only mud and dirt. Stargazing by Paleolithic Africans began 40,000 years ago, became systematized in the Neolithic lands between 6,000 and 12,000 years ago. from which comes the calendar and the very basis of modern astronomy. The Timbuktu manuscripts reveal the study of maths in the Niger Valley and astronomy in the Niger Valley more than 300 years ago. What we now know as the study of physics could be found in Mali. We now know from records even earlier than that. So Pliny was right. He was right about Africa as a center of innovation once. He was right about Africa as a center of innovation once, before a world order asserted itself in which scientific knowledge and modern technologies are largely produced in the global north, whilst those in the south remain passive consumers and recipients. This is, however, not how it once was, and there is no reason to believe that this is how it must always be. This is not how it once was, and there is no reason to believe that this is how it must always be. Indeed, some recent developments have indicated another set of possibilities, that Africa might yet take a great leap forward from the dismal place of investing less than 0.5% of its GDP in research and development to something else entirely, as evidenced by the outstanding contribution of African scientists like the Nigerian Philip EMMANUEL, the father of the supercomputer, in the 1980s, to, in the past decade, the groundbreaking adaptations of ICT in the Kenya M-Pesa system. Now, M-Pesa is Swahili for mobile money transfer. It's groundbreaking, it's revolutionary. They're trying to find ways to deal with the technical and regulatory issues so that we can introduce it into Europe. Or indeed the Ushahidi, which is Swahili for testimony, corn technologies, a groundbreaking development in agriculture that has transformed yield in agriculture in that part of Africa and holds great promise for the rest of the world. And indeed, the level of scientific aspiration revealed in the launch of Niger satellite. So we now need to see put in place the policy and the levers for delivery that rejects the old models of science, technology, and innovation dependency, reasserts national sovereignty so that Africa's priorities are set by Africans rather than by the donors. And this is surely the role of Parliament and parliamentarians. It's the role of those with responsibility for policy-making institutions and for the entrepreneurs and the wealth creators to hold governments to account, yes, but also to initiate action themselves. This is not just simply a matter of what governments and parliaments do, it's what entrepreneurs, what innovators, what wealth creators, what teachers, what we all need to do, so that Africa builds her own critical mass of indigenous scientific, technological, and innovative capacity, driven by institutional reforms in both the public and the private sector, so that the resources necessary are not only forthcoming from a variety of sources, domestic as well as international. We don't always have to look overseas for resources. There are resources here in Africa. There are resources here in this continent which we ourselves need to use better, capital which we need ourselves to mobilize and to maximize the impact of, rather than allowing it to dissipate into the rest of the world. So many wealthy Africans choose, in fact, to invest not in the continent. They would rather buy a big apartment in London. They would rather invest on the stock markets in Frankfurt, in Paris, in London, in New York, than invest on the stock markets in Africa. Well, we need to begin to address the issue. And we need to address it on the basis of talking frankly to one another. We need to recognize our responsibilities, don't we, to the generation to come, to the youth. We need to discuss with them what their responsibilities are in all of this. We need to ensure that those resources, domestic and international, are deployed effectively rather than misappropriated and misplaced in ways that, frankly, are no longer tolerable. When I was the age of some of those young people in this room, I can remember dawn broadcasts. Some of you are old enough in this room to remember dawn broadcasts in this country about corruption. Can we honestly put our hands on our hearts and say that actually we've managed to tackle that issue any more effectively today than we did? It remains a burden and increase on Africa and on Africans. And we have to seek, do we not, to promote a new era of transparency, accountability, and responsibility. Transparency, accountability, and responsibility. Three key words which need to govern the conduct of us all. This is the challenge, and it is the challenge of leadership. Because leadership is central in today's world. Managing change at its rapid pace in a globalized world requires leadership at every level, and a recognition that the critical question for both economic development and social and environmental sustainability isn't whether or not a nation needs science, technology, and innovation capacity, but what type of capacity to build, and how to do so in ways that reflect and are responsive to a nation's needs and identity. The nation's parliament, then, needs to be at the heart of this drive for scientific, technological, and innovative action. Its committee structure, its scrutiny of legislation and of the budget should reflect the reality that successful innovation requires that research and development and evidence-based policy should be the subject matter of debate, inquiry, and the questioning of ministers. Ministers in turn need to ensure that every department has a chief scientist reporting directly to the minister, and a budget to enable them to commission research, and that the government's own chief scientist should report both to the President and to Parliament with the resources to facilitate this function. I can't stress how important that is, and I speak from my own experience. When I was Chief Secretary to the Treasury, my colleagues, the Prime Minister, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and myself were very clear that we wanted every government department to have a chief scientist. One government department held out consistently against this, and it got to the stage in which we had to write it into their settlement letter that they should have a chief scientist. So that government department was Britain's Department for International Development. They didn't want a chief scientist. They themselves missed the trick. They didn't understand the importance of science, technology, and innovation in the development field. They just didn't get it. I'm glad to say they now have got it. But it took some doing. And still we have to struggle in development budgets the world over to ensure that science, technology, and innovation are given the priority they deserve. addressing. We too, in the developed economies, have also to wrestle with the issue of recognizing our responsibility in development terms to promote science, technology, and innovation. Just as we also have to recognize our responsibility, and I speak from experience here as Britain's first Minister for Young People, we have also to recognize our responsibility as governments to the youth. It was never easy to win over the support and acceptance by other ministerial colleagues that in exercising their individual function, they needed to take into account the impact of their actions on the youth. I'm happy to say that that battle has been largely won. Now we do recognize the importance of having a ministerial responsibility for youth and for children. We need to make sure that that's something that is rooted too in the African experience, so that every government department knows that it must bear in mind the impact of its actions on the youth. So, the very machinery of government, therefore, needs to reflect the government's priority of technology, science and innovation, the role and the youth of the youth in that, and the responsibility of the youth to the youth. But the legislature and the executive cannot operate on their own. And in an African context, this subject needs to be a matter of concern too to the traditional leadership structures. The chieftaincy needs to be responsive and responsible in terms of their stewardship of the community's resources and in the exercise of their traditional responsibilities over land and its uses in particular. The failure to recognize the importance of culture in the field of development, a failure which we sought to address in 2005 with the African Commission, has led to the wasting of billions of dollars of overseas development aid, because we simply didn't realize the importance of ensuring that development policies have linkages with culture and with traditional leadership practices and peoples. So if Africa is to have a sustainable green revolution, if Africa is to have a green revolution that is impacted upon by science, technology and innovation, this will need to be remedied, and traditional leadership will be the key. There are some examples of good practice. Here in Ghana, the development of a new agricultural university in Kibi, an initiative led by the Ochi, represents a bold new approach with science, technology, higher education and vocational exercise and excellence in farming at its forefront. And such an approach is worthy of support. And I hope it will enjoy bipartisan support, and I hope that it will enjoy the support of donors, and that we will see the funding of agricultural research, technology and innovation in ways that ensures that we develop here a world-class institution which recognizes the significance of traditional and indigenous knowledge and the innovations of local people as worthy of study. Very often when we talk about innovators, we imagine somehow that it doesn't include local folk, that it doesn't include the woman down the road who has actually developed a new and exciting way of utilizing the share nut in order to develop the cosmetic industry in ways that themselves add value and give hope to those who harvest the nut. Well, we need to rethink how we view the issue of innovation in ways that recognizes the significance of traditional and indigenous knowledge. The innovative capacities of grassroots organizations, even when funding is in place to support them, are stifled by bad policies and inadequate and defective laws, not least in the field of intellectual property, where, sadly, Africa's intellectual property laws do not protect traditional and indigenous knowledge and the innovations of local people. This is a matter for parliaments, for governments, for the African Union, and for the UN's intellectual property mechanisms in Geneva. Africa needs, if it is once again to become a crucible for innovation and the development of appropriate and relevant technologies, to protect the value added by the African innovator and entrepreneur, if its potential is to be realized. Otherwise, we will once again witness the return to exploitative patterns that have characterized our past experience. So, what needs to be done? I want just to suggest that perhaps as a first step, we need to integrate science, technology, and innovation considerations into the nation's economic policies and plans. China, India, the tiger economies of Southeast Asia all did this to good effect. That lies at the heart of Southeast Asia's economic success. It didn't just happen. It happened because peoples and the governments of a country like Malaysia determined in the 1950s that they were going to integrate science, technology, and innovation into the nation's economic policies and plans, and their demand for our economies. And what we've got to recognize is that we can compete. We must not succumb to defeatism. Yes, the economies of the East certainly enjoy some first mover advantages in India and China in particular are of economic scale. But you know, when you look at the demographics, the middle class in Africa is growing faster and is greater in numbers than the middle class in India as a market for scientific and technological innovation. So it argues for us to step up regional integration and regional economic cooperation. It argues for us to step up the development of common markets in Africa. And in the meantime, we must use the windfalls at this stage in the economic commodity cycle that result from that success of the economies of the East and their demand for our economies, our commodities. We must use those windfalls to invest wisely in strengthening economic institutional regimes, in education and innovation capability in this continent. If not, Africa will slip still further behind and suffer still more in any subsequent downturn in world commodity prices. So what does this mean for Ghana at this particular time? Ghana has already identified a number of key priority areas for research and development: biotechnology, nuclear and atomic energy, minerals and mines. Its minerals research strategy focuses on increasing the use of existing technologies and geological study. In agriculture, cassava has been singled out for particular study, as has, not surprisingly, cocoa. There's a draft science and technology policy and documents. UNESCO is partnering with Ghana to develop these into a national strategy. All well and good, but Parliament needs to ensure that its science committee is properly resourced and staffed with a unit to assist it in its oversight of these plans, if aspirations and plans are to become a reality on the ground. Africa is full of plans. Africa has lots of aspirations. What Africa needs is reality on the ground. Real, lasting, sustainable change. And the UN Economic Commission for Africa, so ably represented at this gathering by its Secretary General, has made the point, and I quote, "Growth has not yet led to substantial employment generation, particularly in the formal sector. At the same time, Vulnerable groups such as the aged, youth, and people with disabilities also face challenges in participating in Africa's economic recovery. So Parliament and its committee structure and individual parliamentarians actively need to pursue the interests of their constituents and young people in particular, and are best placed to do so, to make sure that the right linkages are made, to make sure that those linkages are purposefully stimulated and nurtured by public policy and incentives from government at every level. Linkages around intellectual property protection, competition, foreign direct investment, taxes, mobility of scientists and engineers, technology, regulation, licensing, all influence the evolution and growth of national systems of innovation. And I just want to take this opportunity to comment on two aspects of this that I suggest deserve more attention from Parliament and policymakers. First, intellectual property protection. Ghana, along with Botswana, Kenya, South Africa and Zimbabwe, stands out. They have actually revised their patent legislation over the past 10 or 20 years. They've done well in that sense. They've revised the legislation. Swaziland, however, still relies on statutes that go back to 1939. You have a situation in Mozambique in which the statutes go back to 1959. And although Africa's nations are signatories to the Paris Convention, to the World Intellectual Property Organization Convention, to the Berne Convention, very few, in fact, when you look at it, Kenya, Mauritius, South Africa, yes, they've taken steps to see that intellectual property offices are active, well-staffed and equipped, and the necessary patent information is readily available and used by researchers. Just very few African countries have in fact done that. And yet it is crucial to science, technology, and innovation. So Ghana needs to take a lead in West Africa and demonstrate its commitment to ensuring that this vital tool is available so that investors and innovators are properly rewarded. You know, between 2000 and 2004, this continent of Africa, our continent, produced only 633 patents, compared to the more than 8 million that were produced. 633 as against 8 million. This is not some sort of academic exercise. This is our future. This is the future of these young people here. If we want them to be scientists, technologists, if we want them to be innovators and entrepreneurs, we have a responsibility as the older generation to make sure that we protect their property rights in their knowledge. Otherwise, the patterns of the past, patterns of exploitation, which are intolerable for Africa in the 20th century. The second area I would like to address is the role of Pan-African institutions, the Africa Union, and that important but at times overlooked resource, one of the Africa Union's constituent parts, thanks to the foresight of President Wade of Senegal, who identified it as such in the African Union treaties, and I refer, of course, to Africa's diaspora, because the diaspora is now a constituent part of the African Union. Again, I would suggest that parliamentarians have a key role in making sure that paper plans are delivered with practical purpose in mind. I was in the diplomatic service of my country in Pretoria in 2000. 2007 as UK High Commissioner, when the European Union Council adopted the Africa-EU Strategic Partnership, a joint Africa-EU strategy. This identified science, technology and innovation as a priority for EU-African cooperation. The strategy identifies the building of knowledge-based societies and economies as the basis of that cooperation, and states that science, technology and innovation is an essential engine of social economic growth and sustainable development, vital to the MDGs. These are welcome words, but what has happened to that strategic partnership? The STEAP is focused on disseminating knowledge in workshops and in providing information. What is not so clear is what resources are going to be utilized. How are the priorities going to be set? And I would suggest that that is a matter for parliamentarians. And the parliamentarians are well placed through the Pan-African Parliament to hold both the EU, its Commission and its Council to account, and the AU, its Commission, its Council and State to account in this respect. Ghana's excellent delegation of parliamentarians is well placed to take the lead, and they will find many allies in the UK Parliament in seeking to ensure that EU money is well spent in support of NEPAD's and African Union's efforts to enhance the quality of investment decisions and country-based science, technology and innovation policies through analysis and information sharing, and also through NEPAD's excellent coordinated plan for action for science, technology and innovation, which has established a number of significant research projects, including the African Institute of Advanced Mathematics. This Pan-African approach must surely be the right way forward. NEPAD and the AU are right to focus on young people, on youth and education, skills and capacity building in this respect. Young people need advanced maths, without which there can be no scientific technological progress. Young people need advanced maths, and advanced maths needs champions. And there's no better place to find those champions than in art. There's no better place to find those champions than in local industry and business. Local industry and business should recognize that they need to join with parliamentarians. They need to join with educators in order to build and develop the math skills of young people in each and every country. It's not enough to say, oh, well, leave it to government. It's not enough for government to say, well, leave it to the teachers. We are all in this together. We live too, you know, in an increasingly globalized age. When my grandfather, you know, the cocoa farmer from Taffa, waved his son, Pagukwati, the soon-to-be lawyer, when he waved to him as he boarded the MV Papa. Some of you remember the MV Papa, where my grandfather and my grandmother waved my father away to his studies in London. They never dreamt of what the future might hold. They never dreamt of the way in which air travel and technological advance, the changing patterns of migration, the end of colonialism, the triumph of globalized markets, they never dreamt of the way in which those factors would transform this world. They dreamt, of course, for their son. They were full of hope for the promise he displayed. But they never dreamt of the world in which their son and his son, their grandson, would live. They never dreamt at that time that both their son and his grandson would be lawyers and cabinet ministers. but in two separate countries, thousands of miles away. They never dreamt of that. And yet, it came about. Two separate countries separated by thousands of miles, but with a shared history, and importantly and significantly, an increasing interdependence. Two very different countries, but actually increasingly dependent on each other. Because the reality is that global threats and global shocks are no respecters of borders. The changing patterns of global climatic conditions means that we sink or we swim, or we are left high and dry together. There is no escape from our interdependence. So it has never been more important to consider, in the light of these technological changes, in the light of this new global interdependence, it's never been more important to consider how Africa's diaspora, its sons and daughters, their descendants, can contribute to science, technology, and innovation in their ancestral homeland. Only the best is good enough for Africa. 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 So that once again we may say, there is always something new out of Africa. God bless you.
Only the best is good enough for Africa. Only the best is good enough for Africa. Only the best is good enough for Africa.